are we are being recorded.
All right.
That's what the robot voice says.
Yeah. We'll give it just a couple more seconds here.
There we go. Trigger finger.
Yeah. I figure if we start right at 10, then we're doing our part.
Yeah, it's harder to see what screen is highlighted once you're screen sharing. And so it's like, oh, where's my cursor actually clicked into?
Yeah, yep. Okay, so it is 10 o'clock. We should get started. So welcome everyone to this first session in the Technological Solutions track. We'll hear from Alyssa and Annie at the University of Washington on the topic of leveraging online reference to understand user experience. My name is Jeremiah, and I'll be the conference committee member moderating this session. Before I hand things over to our presenters, I just want to quickly point out that we'll answer questions at the end of the session, but you can submit your questions anytime by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom bar of your Zoom screen. If you don't see that bar, you should be able to make it appear by hovering your cursor at the bottom of the Zoom screen or possibly anywhere on the Zoom screen. There's also a chat button there that you can use for comments or discussion, or if you're having some tech issues. But please use the Q&A button for asking questions. We'll answer those at the end of the presentation. So with that, I will pass things over to Alyssa and Annie.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our presentation. So we'll start off with a few introductions.
Hi, folks. I am Alyssa Deutschler. I'm the Online Reference Services Coordinator and Information Science Librarian at UW Libraries. I use she, her pronouns.
And I'm Annie Pepitone. I'm the Integrated Library Systems Coordinator and Systems Librarian at UW Libraries, and I use she, her pronouns as well. So we're going to give a little background information, a little bit about what we do in our organizational structure and how we work. So if you want to go ahead, Alyssa.
Okay, thank you. I know this is so difficult because we're not interacting in person. I mean, I'm sure you guys all know this, like the difficulty of Zoom presenting. So it's weird to be talking into an empty box and to be like looking at the screen and looking at notes. So I am the Online Reference Services Coordinator at UW. Online reference has a really long history at the UW Libraries. So we started that back in 2002. Really early days. We have always offered a 24/7 chat service. And we also, a sort of unique aspect of our online reference service is that it is unified. So we have one online reference system that's used by all 16 of our libraries across all 3 of our branch campuses. So a little bit different than somehow libraries do it. And it's always been, online reference has always been a very popular service at UW and very heavily promoted by the libraries. So as an example, we fielded about 19,000 questions on chat and email last year in 2020. Over to you, Annie.
All right. So I feel like we're at a news desk right now on location in Bothell, Washington. So what I do is I coordinate the work between our backend of our integrated library system, which is ALMA, and the work with the discovery layer of Primo. I'm also the developer for Primo. So my work focuses on customizing for usability and accessibility of Primo. And I work in the library's Information Technology Services and Digital Strategies Department, which is known as ITSDS. So how did this team up occur? I know this may seem like an unusual partnership between chat reference and IT. So long story short, we both serve on 2 committees focused on 2 different aspects of the web environment for the libraries. So one of them, which is very unfortunately named, is DILS, which is the Discovery and Integrated Library System Operations Group, which I chair that group. And I actually asked Alyssa to serve as our liaison to public services because of her role with chat reference, but also having a real pulse on what's going on with our users, which is important whenever we're tinkering with, our integrated library system. And then basically this group focuses on policies and procedures and configurations and communications around the discovery layer and the ILS. The second group is called PWOG. We really like acronyms at UW, which is the Public Web Operations Group. And this group focuses on the university library's web presence as a whole. And I used to co-chair this group as well. And Alyssa also serves as a member. So between both groups having diverse membership, this allows us to get different perspectives on subject matter, but also just allowing us to work together a lot more and to collaborate more frequently, and easily exchanging ideas for different user studies and fixing and implementing different solutions for our users. So I'm going to move on to our history of assessment and usability efforts. So over to you, Alyssa.
Thank you. So way back in 2015, a small team of folks at UW Libraries undertook a large-scale assessment of chat reference in order to get a better idea of the kinds of questions that our patrons were asking. We took a whole quarter's worth of transcripts and analyzed them for all sorts of criteria. We looked at patron type, question complexity, applying the Reed scale. We looked at subject area. In short, we looked at way, way, way too many things. In fact, subsequent presentations that I've done on this project have been titled, "Let's Never Do This Again." But a positive outcome of that sort of exhaustive assessment effort was that we realized over the course of conducting it that our transcripts provided a window onto pain points in our system, like where our patrons were getting tripped up. We saw, for example, that patrons consistently were confused about ebooks, their access limits. Why is it that I used this one ebook one time and I was able to download it, but here this other one is completely I can only download it for 24 hours, or I can't download it at all. And because we do have a centralized reference system, it allowed us to get a really broad look at all users across our system as well. So everybody from undergrads at our Seattle campus, or faculty at the Tacoma branch, which is south of Seattle, researchers in our medical school, medical facilities. Everybody uses chat because it's very popular. And so we realized as well that looking at these transcripts helped give us a good perspective on many types of users of our system. So the assessment coordinator and I began thinking about how different units or different services in the libraries might actually benefit from the user behavior information that we were sitting on in these transcripts. Now over to you, Annie.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the usability work at UW Libraries. So there are two different departments that carry out usability work at the libraries. One of them being assessment, which is for library staff members, and then ITSDS, which for us, we have 3 staff members, and right now we have 1 undergraduate student and 1 graduate student from the Department of the Human-Centered Design and Engineering program. So assessment covers more of the services and spaces, more of the physicality of things, whereas ITSDS really covers the web and systems supported by libraries IT, essentially. So for our talk, I'll be mainly talking about the work that's done within my department. So in 2017, one of the things that we did is we developed what we call the UX Cafe program, which I'm realizing we need to rename now in COVID times. But this program allowed us to do one-shot usability testing in a quick manner. So we only evaluate one element and centralize ourselves in a common space on campus and provide incentives in the form of coffee or pastries, or we offer to put money on their Husky card in exchange for about 5 to 15 minutes of providing us feedback. So this allows for us to have a higher number of participants to provide better clarity on a system, service, or an issue in a fast amount of time. So we really doing small, nimble projects rather than these large, giant scale projects that take us a year to implement. So now we're going to move on to a little bit about our pre-pandemic uses of chat data. On to you, Alyssa.
Thank you. So after our big assessment project, I started basically shopping around the idea of using chat transcripts to, understand user behavior, user questions about our services. I started going around to different groups, basically saying like, hey, are you interested in problems that users might be having with our resources or services? And one of the first groups that was interested was our interlibrary loan staff. So at the time, they were planning an update of their website and their infrastructure, the Iliad forms. And so they wanted to know more about the kinds of questions or the kinds of problems that patrons were having with ILL. So we put together a small ad hoc group consisting of like chat and assessment staff. And we analyzed, again, a quarter's worth of chat transcripts, but this time just for ILL questions, so a little bit more manageable. And it was very interesting because we just essentially like sorted through these to see what sort of ILL questions came up. And one of the biggest conclusions that we came to was that patrons were so confused about what ILL even meant and the possibilities of what they had access to through ILL. But we also noticed that there was a lot of uncertainty that patrons had about what was going to happen when they clicked the request button. So at the time we had a request button embedded in our search that basically just indicated like request, I think it was like request via ILL. And so we saw a real pattern where patrons would be coming in to chat to ask about what that meant before clicking on it, or how much it was going to cost, or what the ramifications would be before they did that. And it was great because one of the outcomes of this assessment was to change that button to give a little bit more information. We now have separate buttons that show when you request something via Summit, when Summit was active, how many days that would take, and then a separate button for ILL that shows how many days approximately that will take. And it's interesting because we've seen a reduction in those types of questions.
All right, now I'm going to talk about Primapalooza, as I like to call it. So one of the things that we had as an issue was our Primo requesting buttons. After moving to the new Primo interface, the new UI, as we call it, in 2017, we started having issues with our requesting buttons not appearing or just disappearing at random, which, as you all will know, is super fun for business. And so this resulted in a team up with chat to get user stories. And I also requested that they flag every time they get an issue related to this, so we could gather up as much information as we could, as well as like stats on how much of an impact this is having with folks across all three campuses. And so what this really did is it helped us present with our vendor, Ex Libris, how big of the issue it was, what all the different variables were, the frequency, what browsers, how widespread, and it really helped to persuade them to take it to development, which, as anyone that's worked with Ex Libris knows, it's really hard to get them to take things to development. So this led to 6 months of discussions with support and development to get the issue fixed. But as of today, this issue has been resolved. So it really shows, yay, finally, we took it off of our known issues list. But it's one of those things that really shows how much of an impact using chat transcripts can really make, especially with our vendor. Another thing that we happen to have happen as part of the new UI was confusion over our login language. Now, funny enough, it's the same login language we had with the previous iteration, the classic version. However, it was creating a lot more confusion about who needed to log in, when they needed to log in, why they were logging in. And it was one of those things, after consulting with chat reference and user account services and DILs, we were able to quickly workshop phrasing to get the banner info changed in Primo. And so now it's much more clear as to who should be logging in and what the purpose of logging in will do for folks, which has made a huge difference, I know, with the numbers that we get related to logging in. Now, connected to that, we had the access page. So this was another thing that we did in consultation with chat and PWOG, our other group, was basically designing an entire page that would cover what patrons had access to what and what our public notes mean in Primo. And this basically page, because we were able to workshop in this small group together with the information that we had from chat, we were able to link that to all of our public notes in Primo and to our LibGuides A to Z database. And so wherever you are, you'll be able to find a link to that page and know what icons mean, what certain phrasing means, who has access to what certain things, which has been helpful, especially now that we're fully online right now. And then lastly, we had search result issues. So back in 2016, when I first started, I was notified by ILL about an uptick in requests for items that we own from other institutions. We saw like 30 to 40% of an uptick in people requesting items that they could easily get from us, but they were requesting from Summit. So between reviewing the chat information about that and reviewing what we had within our library alone, we were able to figure out that patrons were having a hard time finding items in our collection because Summit was appearing above UW by a lot. It would be second, third, fourth page before you would see anything from UW. And so that was causing a lot of issues with them being able to find known items in our collection. So one of the things that I was able to do, since I had all that information, was look at our back end, and I discovered our search result boosting had Summit boosted well over our institution. And so that was one of those things that just ended up janky after we implemented Primo in the first place. And so I was able to do test searches and things with PWOG and chat reference to see what the right number of blending between those two factions would work. And after doing that, we haven't seen the issue come back since we've configured, and that's even with the implementation of the central discovery index. So that's also a way that we've made a big change. That's resulted in a reduction in our ILL and our Summit requests for items that we already owned, which was great. So now what? I imagine we've all said this at least once since the pandemic. How do we navigate the pandemic with our services?
I like the fact that the icons on that slide showed people very socially distanced. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, you'll
like,
notice that on every slide.
Your library staff only exist in the form of a computer now. That's fine. That's how we're just avatars.
That's how we roll. So how do we pivot, Alyssa?
So after the pandemic closed the UW Library's buildings in 2020, it is no surprise to learn that our online reference stats like really skyrocketed. I mean, obviously, there were many things in flux, a lot of confusion, and patrons had nowhere else to turn with their questions since our buildings were closed and we did not have staff on site to answer phones. So almost immediately, we started to see what I think of as question trends, waves of different types of questions coming in. So initially, those questions were really centered around the super basic, are you open? Since the UW had discontinued classes in a not necessarily very standardized way, we had faculty who were telling students that they should go to the library in order to take their final exams, with the idea that there was going to be some sort of like mystical proctoring happening in our buildings if the students used one of our library computers. And then afterwards, there were just also a lot of questions about like materials. So for example, folks had stuff on hold that they hadn't picked up before the buildings closed, or they were needing to leave the area and they had materials that they needed to return before they were fleeing the region, and our book returns were closed. So there were just all sorts of questions that were coming in. And then as time went on, we saw questions from faculty who were trying to plan for the upcoming spring quarter that was, looming. So questions like, how am I going to get the streaming version of this video that I've shown for many years in my course? Or how can my class of 200 students, can they all use the same ebook that I've assigned? And what's interesting is after our libraries closed and we started to see this rush of questions, our communications team began creating FAQs and status update pages for our website. And almost organically, we began working in a type of feedback loop where I would be sort of sifting through and reporting out what were the major question trends of the day, which would then inform what was going on these FAQs and on the status pages. I think of it as like a symbiotic feedback loop where those communication staff would come to me to ask about what was happening. And then, or I'd be very frantically letting them know like, oh my God, this week, everybody needs to know what's going on with the book returns because we have, things are coming due and we have hundreds of people who need to know like how to get rid of their materials. And it's interesting because this resulted in a lot of just like quick changes and exchanges of information that had not happened before. As many of you know, University of Washington is a large system. Our libraries are many across many different campuses. And like many libraries, we are somewhat siloed. And almost immediately, I felt those silos sort of melting as we started to work more swiftly and more nimbly to get information out to our patrons that they needed so desperately.
And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we had to rethink user testing. We at University of Washington just had like a really long established practice of doing in-person user testing. We would either use our usability lab or we would do it around campus. But with COVID-19, we really had to think about how we recruit, how we test, how quickly we can test, and how we're getting consent all online. And so trying to be resourceful, we decided to adopt Zoom as our main method of remote testing since this platform was already really familiar to our students, staff, and faculty, because that's where we switched everything to when we shut the doors. And so in doing that, we also adopted Figma for mockups so we could have more collaborative design process among the web and UX team. Instead of hovering over one person with Photoshop, it allowed us to have many hands being able to move around elements to mock up things to get it out the door really quick. As far as recruitment, we started using social media channels that we normally didn't have to resort to because physicality on campus, you could grab, like get 25 people in an hour. However, online, it's you're kind of yelling into, a void. So we went for using Twitter, Facebook, and actually Reddit, which was interesting experience in itself as sources of our recruitment, along with tapping into our subject librarians to send information to their subject areas. Another change was our incentives process. As I was mentioning earlier, we can't get away with some of the practices that we were doing before. We can't just send them coffee or pastry. And refilling their Husky card doesn't really mean much right now. And so essentially we had to figure out, okay, we have to do online gift cards. And so we had to quickly figure out what's going to work, what denominations we had to use, like for how much time they were giving us, which is more complicated than just buying, some muffins in bulk from Costco. So that was one thing we had to figure out is like how much budget we needed, and it was bigger than we had before. And so trying to shift different, aspects of cost, as well as figuring out all the new territory. And then lastly, we kind of had to figure out how to provide a consent form online and a signature process for users. And that was something that took us a little bit to kind of figure out what was going to work, how that was going to work. The biggest change overall, though, was the sheer amount of testing being done and how quick it all needed to be. I mean, luckily for us, we have 2 students that are amazing and that can mock things up for us in a very quick fashion. but the last project we had them working on was a 5-day turnaround with a mock-up and getting user testing done. And they did it with flying colors, which without them, I don't know if we'd be able to do things as nimbly as we've been able to. So these are a few examples of pandemic projects that we've had. So one of the bigger projects for us, well, the biggest obstacles was figuring out how to de-emphasize physical locations and physical services, which were largely covered on our library's homepage. So this was our previous website. And so part of that was, if we de-emphasize the physicality of the library, what do we cover? What goes in its place? So we relied heavily on chat reference, our PWA group, and user testing to help us figure out what needed to be covered and what needed to be emphasized. So part of this was developing kind of a new tile structure to call out specific services that were coming up frequently in chat. And another unwieldy area was figuring out how to communicate the constant changes to services without having basically users facing a super long page of FAQs or just a giant wall of information. So our students did environmental scan of similar library web pages and came up with the idea of doing a service status box and an iconography that would make sense to our users. So each service is actually hyperlinked to a new associated page that reflects their current needs. And on the service subpages, we created status banners that go across every top of page that would indicate information about the service status of that service that they're visiting the page on. And then additionally, we had to redesign our main web page banner to be less alarmist and a little bit more friendly. So we removed, it used to be red because we only used it for when we were having outages. And now to our lovely gold, our husky gold, if you will, to be more informational and more friendly to everyone. And we also created pages for our general COVID-19 information, curbside pickup, and which was became much more of a detailed page with pictures and a map, because a lot of times trying to get people to figure out where certain book drops are is like, hang a right at this flag and then go down this really long stretch, and then it dead ends, stop there, cross a breezeway, and then you're there. So having pictures really helps with that.
Like we realized in chat that a lot of our descriptions that we initially had on our returns page and our pickup service page were oriented towards things, how library staff would describe things like landmarks that they would use, which isn't necessarily the landmarks that a patron would have or use. And so we introduced pictures. That was pictures and pinpoint maps was much more helpful and really helped allay a lot of confusion.
Most definitely. So we're going to talk a little bit about the ongoing work that we're still doing as part of the pandemic. So we are continuing our iterative process at the library's homepage by adjusting the website for reopening of one of our spaces for student study. And another project that we're working on is uncoupling chat and consultations from each other. What we found is that in our user research, the patrons are confused and will interchange the terms chat and consultation when they're put side by side. So our basically overall recommendation was splitting the two services and focusing on what they offer on separate pages. And this will result to adding additional tiles to that main page and additional subpages, as well as an additional spot on the status page, which you'll notice we've already done in preparation for implementing those new designs. Over to you, Alyssa. Oh, shoot. And back. Sorry, trigger happy. Oh, Alyssa, you're muted.
I'm just going to talk briefly about our work with Hati ETOS. So for folks who have this at their libraries or don't, So I should quickly give an explanation about the HATI ETAS program. It's the Emergency Temporary Access Program, basically permits special access to specific digital materials in HathiTrust that correspond to physical materials in our collection. So essentially giving students and faculty access to items that they wouldn't, digital access to items that would normally exist only in the physical form. So it accounts for over 1.7 million items currently available to our patrons. And so it's been a real boon, of course, for students and faculty who are scattered all around the world right now. But for anybody who has this program implemented at their library, you'll also know that it's really complicated to explain to patrons. So there are limits that aren't typical for our resources, like there's no downloading, there's no printing. It has a very complex login system. Like I like to joke about the nine steps of access. I think it's actually like more like 5, but it feels incredibly onerous when you're trying to explain it to somebody. And then one of the biggest stumbling blocks is if a print item is available in the ETAS program, it cannot circulate. Otherwise, you'll violate the terms of use, and I don't know, the HATI will take everything back. So we saw really consistent patron questions about items in ETAS, and because there are 1.7 million of them, that means that there's a lot of questions that come up around this. And they particularly came to a head when we were able to introduce curbside service. And so physical borrowing was available again. Users would see that a physical item was available in the libraries or existed in the libraries, but then they would be unable to check it out. It would say library use only, and there would be the HATI link. And so this was super confusing. It's like forbidden fruit being dangled in front of your eyes. So this led to a lot of discussions between tech services staff, Annie, and myself about how we could reduce some of this confusion. And ultimately it led to some magic that allowed us to suppress the physical items in our search so that they literally cannot be seen. So anything that is in HATI and exists in physical format is no longer displayed in our catalog. We have an example linked here in our slides if you want to see how that displays. And so the HATI link is the only thing you see. Forbidden fruit taken away. I mean, well, it allows you to see what you have access to right now, which is the HATI version. And it was amazing. Once we implemented that, like I could literally like see the questions being reduced every day in terms of like the kinds of frustrated questions that we were getting in from patrons. We also developed a guide that illustrated all 5 steps of the HATI login process, which probably helped as well.
So the new normal, like what is normal now? Like how are we going forward? So we're just going to briefly touch on this. Like basically, do you want to talk a little bit about the old process?
Sure. I mean, I will just say, right. I think we're all asking what kind of new habits will we be taking out of these COVID times into whatever the new normal looks like to echo what Scout said in her keynote, you know, what do we want to keep doing? And I think that one of the things that we've alluded to here is that previously, you know, we had more defined structures at UW libraries with more siloed sort of structures. And now I feel like a lot of those have melted away. I am working more closely than I ever have with our communications officer. Yesterday, when Annie and I met to do a run through of this presentation, I had been working all day with our communications officer on a new message that was going to go out on our website, a new update to our COVID page. And prior to the COVID times, I would have never worked in such a close way with her, but she was asking me, what kind of questions do you think are going to be seen in chat? And, you know, how is that going to how's that going to inform this message? And I really hope that we'll continue to work like that. We also, Annie and I talked about this yesterday. We had recently had at one of our PWOG meetings where we were talking about new mock-ups for the library's website or homepage. And whereas in previous times, we would really have anticipated a multi-step, arduous process, I think we'd all really adapted to this new normal of like, we're going to put out this new homepage. It might not be perfect. We might need to make changes. We will make those changes and it's going to be okay. And that's a move away from a more slow and deliberative process, which I think is definitely good. We don't want to change things willy-nilly, but we also don't necessarily always need to go as slow as we have in the past. So I hope
would
all of those things will
agree. Like, part of it is really embracing that change. And that's something that we've really seen with our patrons, our staff, our faculty, all of us, is just the ability to go, okay, something changed. Hey, that's actually better. Great. Rather than before, it's like if we changed a menu item or an icon, it was like, how dare you? Like, it's been that way for 5 years and it should be there for another 10. It's great because now we're able to do things as nimbly and as quickly as we've been able to, but to iterate. And instead of waiting for every 10 years to do a full refresh of our website, it allows us to do little bits at a time, but to improve the overall experience. And so the puppies will live, everyone's fine, but that's something I really hope that we continue to take away from that, is that embrace of change as not necessarily a bad thing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a giant overhaul to make change. So that brings us to the end. We want to leave the time that we've got left for questions. So Jeremiah, do we have any questions?
Not at the moment. At EOU, we're actually going to be using chat to kind of figure out how to go about redesigning our website. It's been quite some time. We're going to have a very small team to do this. Do you have any advice for people that would be working on a team of 2 people and and that's it?
Well, I know from the design perspective, there are only 3 of us that have been doing the work, so not much more. We have 1 more person on you.
Yeah.
But I would definitely say take advantage of stakeholders, like stakeholder groupings. One of the things that we really appreciate, and I appreciate, is those groups that I talked about of different types of stakeholders that we have, depending on what we're working on. With PWOG, we've got people from Bothell campus, Tacoma campus, Seattle campus, different backgrounds of liaisons, public services, technical services, circulation. But if you can get together, a group of people that are diverse, it really helps make the process go a lot faster, because you get all those people in a Zoom room to talk about their experience with the mock-ups that you're providing. It helps, because a lot of times you kind of look at it and go, yeah, this makes sense, when sometimes it really does not make sense to anyone but the design team.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if you had anything to add, Alyssa.
No, I think that makes total sense.
I mean, that's something that we really enjoy, that we have is these groups that were already established that we can tap, and in different ways than we used to. Like, some of our decision making for the website, it used to take 6 months to a year to make like 1 page or 1 change. As you know, it can be kind of a long silo-y process. And so these groups, because we're all embracing a different kind of change, are much more willing to like quickly provide feedback. Like, if you can provide them mock-ups, and 45 minutes, like, you'll get comments.
Yeah.
It's a really great way to go about it.
Yeah. So we have a few questions. I think we had one in the chat for a redesigned website. Who should be on the team?
So what we've done with our web and UX team, we're a little funky. So we've got our head of usability and web services who really leads the charge. And then we also have a web designer, and then myself, because I also do work around user experience. And so we have perspective just on the design team. But then on top of that, we tend to include people from public services, account services, circulation, some varying disciplines. So, arts and sciences, arts and humanities, sciences,
Special collections.
special collections. You always need to have like archives, special collections, like, because they're definitely a specialized track of the website. So kind of gathering, a broad swath of people like that makes a difference.
Makes sense. So we've got 4 questions in the question and answer queue. So the next one we have is, could you share more about how you collected consent online, e.g. specific software platform?
So Big UW has basically done DocuSign. And so that is one methodology that basically we've taken advantage of because Big UW. However, one thing that we were looking at before they had actually bought that platform was using Google Forms, and then allowing for either an upload of a signature or a box where you type your name and then check mark that basically this will be for your signature in this space. And that also works as well. I know a lot of smaller universities that can't afford DocuSign because it's an expensive piece of software, can use that in that way, and that does provide consent.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So next question. So you're making rapid iterative changes to the site. What is the approval process? A working group that signs off on design? That's what I've put in place at SOU from Tom Dodson.
Yes, so that's essentially the gist is, by the way, I'm SOU alum. However, basically with our PWOG group, because we have a diverse set of stakeholders, we run mock-ups through them, and we run them through the specific services that we're altering as well. So like if ILL is involved, or if circulation is involved for borrowing, we include them on that approval process. But basically they review it, they give us feedback, we bring it back with a finalized mock-up, they approve, we put it up. So the fastest process we've done has been 4 or 5 days in getting things from start to finish.
And I'll just jump in here and mention that, so that would be like for our homepage redesign, but there are smaller groups that are working with different aspects, like our COVID updates page.
Right.
Is handled by a communications team, which is like headed by just one person, our communications officer. So that's like a much smaller group who controls that, and that
well,
page
and
is
she goes to
more.
cabinet, to libraries
Yes.
cabinet to get the approval for that page. So it really depends on the pages that you're working on. But with the home page, we tend to go with our PWOG group.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. What type of UX testing are you doing now in the online environment? Has your focus changed any?
No, so what we've been doing is we've been doing less large scale. That is one thing with the pandemic, is we used to be able to do, like quarter long or year long projects, and that would be just our focus. But in pandemic times, we've really realized that doing our one-shot testing really allows us to do more iteration, more improvement on a faster scale than like every other year that we were doing with some services, because we were doing such large scale projects that there was burnout involved. So doing the one shot, it's actually made it much easier. And so we run some of them, but we allow our students to run a lot of our one shot testing with supervision. And so doing something like primo facets, like indicating, what facets we have, what facets are available to us, and what they would use, that's a one shot. We've also done one shot just on our curbside pickup page, or a one shot just on a mock-up for consultations. And so we don't go any beyond 20 minutes. And if we do, then it becomes more of a medium scale project. And we've only done maybe one or two of those since pandemic times.
Great.
Mhm.
Next question. How well has recruiting students for UX via social media worked? Changed in the volume and feedback?
It is, it's not as big of a volume as we were doing by the physicality of being in our building, because we got a lot of pass-by traffic from like our Starbucks or from, you know, our hub where we have all our food. However, it's not a dramatic decrease either. And that's been the really interesting thing, is people have been more motivated by the fact that we're giving them an Amazon gift card, which right now is like gold, you know, in pandemic times, because, you know, you can get stuff very quickly for whatever need that they're experiencing. And so I know that the incentives, because we changed what those were, we didn't have a dramatic loss in how many people we were getting. It's a different kind of people, which is interesting. And so we're getting a more diverse group than we did before even, which is kind of funny.
Great. And so we're at time, but we have one more question. When you said you had students doing UX testing for you, was that iSchool students or undergrads?
So we have a mix right now. We have, and both are actually not from the iSchool. They're both from the human-centered of design and engineering program. So they really focus on user experience and user design. And one of them is an undergraduate in that program, and another one is a graduate in that program. And so we do the buddy system with our students. And so we always have a student that's been with us for 2 years and a student that's been with us for 1 year, so they can learn from each other and learn different techniques. And then when one leaves, we have the other one train the new that we get.
So we have had students from the iSchool working on usability. I think it's like we have an embarrassment of riches at UW in terms of, we have the human-centered engineering and design, we have an HCI program, and we have the iSchool. So we have a lot of students to pick from.
So it's like every couple of years we swap, and it's, you know, HCDE, or it's the iSchool, or it's, you know, different program. And so it's always nice that we have these like embarrassment of riches and skill set as well, because they can come in and they're teaching us some new things that we didn't even know, and we're like, oh, that's interesting, I'm stealing that. So it's great being able to use them and to be able to have them learn from us and us learn from them. It's a really great process.
Excellent. So we're at time now. Thanks so much, Alyssa and Annie. That was great information. Our next session will start at 11. So you're welcome to stick around, or, you know, grab a cup of coffee or whatever, and we'll be back at 11 o'clock. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremiah.